Hey guys, I'm the Comics Kid 2099, and I want to review a book that I just finished reading earlier today, X-Men: A Skinning of Souls. This is written by Fabian Nicieza. I don't know how to pronounce his name. I've never known how to pronounce it. And it is drawn by Andy Kubert. This is shortly after Chris Claremont left the X-Men books, which I guess I should go ahead and say, A, I am a huge X-Men fan, and B, I'm a really huge fan of Chris Claremont's run on the series. And this was like 92-ish, 93. This was not very long after he had left. He left in issue 3 of Adjectiveless X-Men, and this collects issues 17 through 24. It also has some other stuff that I wasn't interested in. The X-Men Survival Guide to the Mansion, I didn't really care about that. And material from Marvel Swimsuit Special Issue 2, and I really didn't care about that either. So it looks really thick, but a lot of it, like, let's see, that much of it is, there we go, that much of it is not actually story. It's just, you know, supplemental stuff that I didn't care about. Maybe some of you guys would. This is the actual story, issue 17 through 24 of Adjectiveless X-Men. And I'm going to go ahead and jump right into this. I didn't really care about this book. I went in kind of hopeful that it would be good. And the first half of it is pretty good. The first half of it has a group of X-Men going to Russia to meet Colossus's parents, which they had met his parents before, but they're going there to just kind of hang out, and there is an incident going on near Russia, and so the Russian version of Nick Fury, Colonel Alexei Vazhin, and I'm not just making that up, he's missing an eye, and he's about as shady as Nick Fury is, so he's pretty much the Russian version of Nick Fury. He is trying to deal with this incident that happened in a Russian town where this mutant called the Soul Skinner has basically turned the entire town into a town of mindless zombies. They don't have any thoughts or anything inside them, and the Colonel, he wants to try and take care of this quietly and quickly before the Soul Skinner can go to another town, and so he enlists the aid of the X-Men. And this story, like I said, this is the best part of the book. It's still not great, because we find out that for some reason the Russian government thinks that the only person who can deal with the Soul Skinner is Illyana Rasputin, who before she had been artificially aged to adolescence because she was living in another dimension, and then she had these teleportation powers. Well, she's back to being a kid now. I don't actually remember how that happened. I think it was during the Inferno crossover. So she's a kid at this point, and the Russian government says they have a machine that can turn her back into a teenager and give her her mutant powers back, and they think that she is the only person who can stop the Soul Skinner. And the Russian government, they kill Colossus's parents. I have no idea why. It's kind of sort of addressed in the book where Alexei is saying, no, that wasn't ever part of the plan. I don't know why they would do that. And at the end of the book, I don't know why they would do it either. It really doesn't make any sense. I get the feeling that Fabian Nicieza basically just wanted to kill all of Colossus's family, because not too long after this, we have Colossus leaving the X-Men and joining the Acolytes. And I'm pretty sure they wanted to do that, they knew that they wanted to do that, but they didn't necessarily have a good reason for him to be doing that. So they wanted to kill his parents, and then later his sister, who, like, immediately after they go back home, she gets the legacy virus. And that's kind of dealt with here. This is sort of the first time that the X-Men find out about the legacy virus, and it's not too long after we, the audience, found out about it. That was in the Extinction Agenda, if I'm not mistaken. At the very end of that, we get the first sight of the legacy virus, so to speak, and then it's brought up here. And basically, the first half of this book is the best half of the book, where the Soul Skinner, he is sort of a mirror for Scott Summers, where his daughter was dying and he could do nothing. He was powerless to save her. And then he's basically driven insane when he finds out that his wife is a member of the Russian government who was sent to spy on him and make sure that he wasn't too dangerous. And so he's basically just gone insane because his wife, his marriage was a sham, and his daughter is dead. And recently in the Extinction Agenda, Cyclops finds out that his son is Strife. Now, we actually know, now at least, we know that his son is actually Cable. But at the time, Cyclops thought that his son was Strife and that Cable was the clone. And So Cyclops is sort of a mirror for this guy, and beyond addressing that, they don't really actually do anything with it, because Colossus is really the main feature of the first half of this book. And I really wish we had an extra issue here. This has 2 issues in it where basically there's very little action and it's mostly just characters dealing with stuff. That kind of thing happened a lot in the X-Men comics, and this has 2 of those issues, and this is less than 10 issues, so that's kind of a lot. But I definitely wish that we had another issue there so that we could kind of deal with Colossus mourning the death of his parents, we could deal with Illyana mourning the death of her parents, and we could maybe have Colonel Vajan saying, those guys, they were all fired or they were executed for taking extreme measures and killing your parents. I wish we could have something like that where the X-Men can kind of deal with the death of his parents. But after that story, we don't see Colossus anymore in the rest of this book. And the second half of this book is really where things go downhill. This second half is what introduces Revanche, and it kind of complicates the whole Psylocke thing even further. And I say even further because Psylocke was always a complicated character. Now, when she was first introduced to the X-Men, first of all, I should say, originally Captain Britain and his sister Betsy, they were not X-Men characters. They were just Marvel Universe characters, kind of like Spider-Man or Thor or something like that. And then in the mid-'80s, I think it was New Mutants Annual 2, Psylocke was introduced to the New Mutants, and that's kind of her entry point into the world of the X-Men. At first, she was not a complicated character. Her brother was a superhero, and she had telepathy, and that was basically it. And then, around the very, very early 90s, this was still in Claremont's run, we find out that Spiral, under the direction of the Mandarin, turns Betsy into an Asian ninja. And if you're not aware, Betsy was originally from Great Britain, and she was Caucasian. But then Spiral turns her into an Asian. I don't know why. I'm assuming it's because Jim Lee liked to draw scantily clad women, and he wanted to draw someone who was hotter than who Betsy originally was. So they do this weird thing where they turn Betsy into more of a fighter than she was before, and that's a little weird. It's really hard to try and explain how she became an Asian. That's kind of a dumb thing of comics, and then it gets worse. We find out, no, Spiral didn't just turn Betsy into an Asian. There was actually another character named Quanon who was an Asian assassin, and somehow their minds were merged. So both of these characters, Quanon and Psylocke, are half Quanon, half Psylocke. Both of them are. And this other half, this other Betsy, is introduced here, and she's in the original body for Betsy, and they're both basically, for the rest of the book, they're both arguing about which one is the real one. Even when they find out that they are both half Betsy, half Quanon, and there's really no arguing that, they're still kind of catty with each other in the last issue, saying, well, I don't trust you. Oh, that's good, because I don't trust you either. And honestly, that's one of my least favorite parts of Psylocke's backstory. It was already complicated enough. We really did not need more complications here. And if I had to say, one thing I don't really like about Necesia's style with the X-Men is that he loved to complicate things. This book also introduces the plotline of the third Summers brother, or actually, we just know that Cyclops has multiple brothers. We don't know how many there are, but at one point Mr. Sinister is talking to Psylocke, and he says something about your brothers, and Cyclops says, wait, you just said brothers, plural. And Sinister's like, oh, my bad, I didn't mean to. And it's kind of hinted, okay, he has another brother. He loved to complicate things. He loved to make things really difficult. It didn't have to be that complicated, but always he was just adding new layers to stuff, making it much more complicated than he had to. Like I said, there's the third Summers brother thing, that's introduced here. There's the Psylocke Quanon thing, that's introduced here. And then also the Cable Strife thing. I'm pretty sure that was Nesesia, although that was just as much in the X-Force, and I guess Cable wasn't ongoing at this point. Maybe it wasn't yet. That was just as much going on over there as it was here, but since Nesesia was writing X-Force, again, it's him just trying to complicate things. We really did not need so much complication, and this doesn't make any sense as what we had in this era of the X-Men. One other thing I don't like is, at the time, this is probably my single greatest gripe with X-Men comics from the 1990s, is that you have multiple titles, and so something that's going on in one title is going to have an effect on the other title. And for me, I don't necessarily want to read all of the stuff that's going on in the X-Men world. This is something I talked about way back when I dropped all of the single issues that I was reading, because I was only really interested in X-Men Legacy. But because there was constantly crossovers between all of the X-Men books, I was forced to read all of the X-Men books, even though I wasn't really interested in all of them. And that's kind of going on here. You had, really, there were only 2 X-Men books, and then there were other books that were related to the X-Men, but they weren't as core as the 2 main books. There was Uncanny X-Men, which had been going on since the early 60s, and then there was Adjectiveless X-Men, which had been going on since the early 90s. And for example, here, you've got the story where the X-Men go to Russia. And then, for the rest of the book, you don't see Colossus anymore. And then these guys are talking about Illyana Rasputin dying of the Legacy virus. You don't see that happen in this book. Presumably, it's happening in the Uncanny X-Men book. And then Wolverine is talking to Charles about he and Jubilee going to the Savage Land, and they think Magneto is still alive. We don't see that happen here. Presumably, it happens in Uncanny X-Men. And in fact, there's one issue here. One of the covers kind of has a text piece beneath it saying, "This is some stuff that happened while you weren't reading." And I really hate that. If I'm going to read a book like this, I want it to be fairly standalone. I don't mind if this book is picking up subplots that Naseesia had seeded earlier in his run, and I don't mind him seeding subplots for later in his run. I do not like it when he is talking about stuff that happened in another book, and I don't even know if that stuff has been collected in another trade. Maybe it has, maybe it hasn't. That's really frustrating, and that was kind of a thing that was always going on through the 1990s, and then for a little while it wasn't happening in the early to mid-2000s, which is probably why that's one of my favorite runs, my favorite eras of the X-Men. But now that's kind of a thing once again, so whatever. This book, would I recommend it? Probably not. If you are interested in the 90s X-Men, more specifically, maybe you were reading that stuff from the 90s way back then, and you want a nostalgia trip, then yeah, sure, go ahead and pick this up. But you're probably, if you're like me, you're going to be disappointed, because this book really isn't all that great. The stuff that was good could have been a lot better, and the stuff that's bad is pretty darn bad. I personally don't think that it's that great, but I do hope that Marvel keeps putting out some of the stuff from the 1990s, because that is the one decade of the X-Men that I'm the least familiar with, and it's also the one decade of the X-Men where you can find the fewest amount of trades. There's still huge gaps of X-Men history from the 90s that have not been collected, and I would really like to see some of that stuff collected so that people like me who were not there during the 90s could go back and read that stuff. So yeah, that's my review of X-Men: A Skinning of Souls. I hope I was able to help you guys if you were deciding that maybe you wanted to go and read that. I hope I was able to help you guys make up your mind, and I hope you guys like this review. I will be talking to you guys tomorrow about the movie X-Men: Days of Future Past. I will be putting up my review just as soon as I get home. And that's all I have for this video, so I will see you guys tomorrow. Have a great day.